What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Bludborn, and in this video we are going to be taking a look at the build I am currently using for Gundabad endgame. This includes 3-person, 6-person, and 12-person content on all available tiers. This build will update as gear becomes available through the raid, but the basics will be consistent going forward. This video will cover stats, passives, traits, gear, essences, legendaries and traceries, consumables, and even some of the plugins I use for grouping. This will be a little bit longer of a video, so I will be using the chapters feature to timestamp certain portions of the video for easier navigation. Now, before we get into all that, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment. Also take a second to head over to Twitch at twitch.tv/Bludborn and follow me there for all of my live content. And finally, feel free to join my Discord server, and I'll have links for all of that down in the description below. All right, so with all that stuff out of the way, let's get into the first portion of the build itself, which is actually just going to be a broad overview of stats. Now, the stats that we're really going to be focusing on the champ is going to be critical rating, physical mastery, and then tactical mitigation. And this is really from a grouping and endgame standpoint. If you're not doing those things, you probably don't need to worry about the tactical mitigation as much, as most of the other content in the game is fine with just the gear that you're probably already going to have. You don't really need to spec into anything too crazy. Now, the idea is that after critical and mastery are pretty much all the way capped already, you are going to be doing some work with essences, and we'll go into that when we get into that portion by itself. But just keep in mind, the idea here is that we are going to be looking at critical and mastery and then tactical mitigation. And you're going to even see in my build here that my tactical mitigation is a little bit lower, mainly because the group comp that I'm typically running with, that's not been as much of an issue. So I'm trying to really push the critical up as much as I can. Now, for this video, I will not be buffed outside of the 5% morale and power, because that's a very long buff and it just hasn't worn off yet. So let's take a look at where I'm at right now. Crit rating is going to be 1.2 million and physical mastery is going to be 1.5 million. I know these numbers are a little crazy now, but that is just kind of where we're at. So what this really does for me is this is putting my crit rating at 29.8%, as some of that is coming from a red line trait that we'll go over as well. And the physical mastery is at 189.2%. I do still have some room here. There are some pieces of gear that I just haven't had drop yet in some of the tier 4 and tier 5 content. And then also some of the traceries, the gold versions I haven't had drop yet. And again, we will cover that as well. So I just want to give you kind of a look at where we are with this. And you're going to see down here, tactical mitigation on this guy right at this moment is actually very low. It's at 10%. There's a couple other things with grouping mechanics that this will be considerably higher. Also using certain store-bought consumables. Again, we'll cover that as well. Again, this is just kind of an overview. So remember, you're going to try to get your critical and physical mastery up. Critical first, then physical mastery, and then when you have the room for it, you want to get your tactical mitigation up there. So that's going to cover this short portion on stats. Now, this next part is very overlooked because it's not super critical that you have this. It's something that meant a lot more earlier on, but I thought it would at least be worth mentioning that if we look at our passives, so if we open up our skill window and go to the passive tab, one thing that's taken into consideration is actually what your attribute enhancements are at. So right now my might and vitality are both rank 20. Now, if you look at the stat, it actually is giving, so plus 742 might and plus 722 vitality. That's not a really big number by any stretch, but if you are trying to min-max your character, these are things that can help. Also take into consideration the fate. Mine at being at 14 is 402 fate. That is critical rating, that is regen and things like that. So again, it's really from a min-max standpoint, and it's really not a huge deal if you don't have them, but it's like I said, I thought it was worth mentioning that, you know, some characters are going to have those things topped out at rank 20. Now, the next part of this that we're going to take a look at is actually our trait setup. Now, I have traditionally been a yellow line champion. I will run red line when it is necessary. And if you watch live streams, you know I joke around about blue line, but I've actually been kind of working around with that stuff as well. Now, when it comes to endgame right now, there are fights that it is favorable to still have a red line build in there for. If you have multiple champions, it's still not a bad idea to have a mix. I tend to still run yellow line, and I know that's still not 100% preferable in all scenarios, but again, it's what I'm comfortable with. It's what I enjoy playing, and it works out in a lot of these big AOE situations. So if we're taking a look at the trait tree panel, you can see I'm spec'd into the Deadly Storm, and right now we'll go over some of these real quick. One of the big ones that you always want to take is going to be the critical chance increase. It's just a flat 5%. Again, when we were looking previously at our stats, I was really close to 30%. That is because the soft cap is at 25%. Something to note about critical chance in specific, and it kind of goes for other stats as well that are percentage based. Anytime you take the rating number, not rating, but rating number, the rating number is actually going to hit a cap, but percentages can take you over that cap. So in this case, critical will actually cap out at 25% based on the rating number. Now, this being a percentage, this 5% melee crit chance will actually take me up over that. That's why I'm sitting at 30% roughly. And there are other things too that you can get from other buffs that will drive that number even higher. So anytime, like again, our stat priority was critical rating first. So in this case, we're going to want to take crit chance. A couple other big things to note here. I do take the minus 10% attack duration. When you couple that with the buff from Blade Storm, your attack duration is considerably lower. And then when you mix that with other classes, you're attacking much, much quicker. And that is a huge help when you are trying to maximize your damage. Another thing that is kind of important right now is the armor penetration. Things like, you know, armor rend, where it's actually pulling off armor, your Horn of Gondor armor debuff. Those things are huge and again, mixed with other classes in a raid scenario, those things are huge as far as maximizing the output of the group. And that's a very important thing. So in this case, we'll just kind of go through these. So we are taking 5 points into critical chance increase. We're actually adding in brutal strikes. This is actually really great for those scenarios where you can't be doing AOE. You're not going to be maximizing your DPS because it's very situational. So you can actually have brutal strikes, ferocious strikes, merciful strike, feral strikes, and wild attack. You can have those single targets even in your AOE spec, and that's pretty good. We're taking 5 points into wild swings. Again, because this is actually going to give us a 5% crit chance for 10 seconds when it procs. You do need to have all 5 points into this trait to get that perk. So that is a huge one. We're going to be taking vicious strikes because all the strike skills crit chance is increased with this. So again, with our brutal strikes, ferocious strikes, merciful strike, anything that has a single target strike name in it is going to get that increased crit chance. So that's good. We're putting 5 points into deadly strikes. Again, plus 25% critical damage for strike skills. We are going to take every critical option that we can get, really. Once we get down here, we're taking deep strikes mainly so we can get enough points to get further down to get to controlled burn. But you're going to see that deep strikes is going to apply that bleed. So another thing, when you're using your strike skills, it's going to give you the bleed. And that's just another way to optimize your damage because you're going to be applying multiple bleeds to targets. We're going to go ahead and grab ferocious strikes because you can actually see the value in pink or purplish color here. That is the bleed that is being applied from deep strikes, so we want that. And then lastly, in the red line portion of this, we are taking controlled burn because it's just a flat 15% to melee, and then your increased attack speed for 30 seconds. So that is the red line portion of this yellow build. We are grabbing Battle Frenzy and actually grabbing all 4 points of Ardent Rage. That way we can reduce our Battle Frenzy cooldown by 30 seconds. And then it just gives us that fervor pip generation every 10 seconds, which is nice as well to keep your fervor at maximum, so you can just keep pumping out skills and working on that damage. We're going to go ahead and take the 30,000 might increase. We're going to be putting 5 points into our 10% blade skill damage here. Obvious, just flat 10% across all of your AOE skills. Obviously, we're going to have Xing Xing, Raging Blade. You cannot have a yellow line without that. That is just sinful if you do that. We got Broad Sweep, so we're going to increase our AOE target count. Now, what's really cool about this is we'll get into this a little bit later with the legendaries. Your AOE targets from Broad Sweep stack with the Tracery AOE count that you can get. So we'll be looking at the target count of a pretty high number, and we'll look at that a little bit later too. We're going to take all 5 points of Barbed Wall, so we get plus 50% Blade Wall damage. Blade Wall is hitting very hard right now. With all of the other things going on, you're usually in this build, you're hitting between 500 and 800k on a Blade Wall on multiple targets. That's just a ton of damage, and it's great. We're going to be taking Great Cleave, which is our 25% AOE damage for 40 seconds. And then we're also going to be taking Battle Acuity. So we're going to be buffing that even more. That's what's giving us the 25% damage on Great Cleave. We're going to move down to Champion's Advantage. That is the bypass on the mitigations. This is really huge on any of the higher tier content, because the fact that the tier 3 and up, really the mitigations on mobs are much higher, so anything you can do to bypass that is a plus. And then lastly, we're going to take the more the merrier. Blade skills have a 15% chance to generate fervor. This is just another skill when you're combining that with your Battle Frenzy fervor pip generation. You really just should be at full fervor most of the time. You're just really spending it as often as you can. And then last one's obviously going to be Fury of Blades. Super hard hitting, no target cap limit on this. So anything that is in front of you in that narrow frontal cone is going to get hit, and hit very hard, as long as you're using Fury on full 5 fervor, which is pretty easy to do with all the things that we have just talked about. So that takes care of the class traits. We kind of want to go over and take a look at the virtues that I'm using right now. So we're using Confidence, Determination, Valor, Wit, and Zeal. Now, this is where things kind of change around for me based on the situation that I'm in. Most of the time, I can feel pretty safe using these offensive virtues. Now, if there is a particular fight that dictates I need to switch that around, I have no problem switching around to defensive ones. Really going to be looking at those tactical mitigation payout ones. So things like Fidelity, that has a really high payout on it. You've got Honor, Tolerance, things like that, where it just has a high value for tac mit. We would take that in those fights that we really need to have that as high as possible for our damage class. All right, so that's going to take care of the traits as far as virtues and class traits for this build. All right, so for this next part, we're actually just going to be talking about the gear itself. I'm going to leave legendaries out of this because that's a very specific portion that we're going to go over. And with the changes that have been made to the legendary system, it's a little bit more time consuming to cover. So we're going to leave those out of this specific spot. We're going to take a look at the gear right now. I'll go through them one by one, and we'll kind of talk about the essences that are in there as well, because there's a couple specific ones that you want to have in there, again, to help maximize your damage. So right now I've got a couple of the the lower end pieces, like I said earlier in the video, I've not been fortunate enough to have some of the pieces drop to upgrade these, but again, this is a pretty good spot and it makes the champion competitive enough to be in like a tier 2 raid and progression and stuff like that for now till the raid pieces start dropping, or we get the barters. So we're going to take a look at our earrings real quick. We have the gold stud of Puklok's Den. So again, you can see we're looking at might, vit, and crit. That's almost 43,000 crit rating on that. It's a great number for that. We also have the silver stud of Puklok's Den. That is basically the inverse of it. We've got the might, vitality, and physical mastery rating. And then on our necklace, this is actually the one from Houses of Rest. This was the tier 4 version, I believe. So we've got the finesse and crit, and I've put 2 Delver's essences of crit rating in there. So those are the higher end ones that you can get right now. And you're going to see a lot of crit rating essences in here, by the way. Now, the bracelets can be a little off-putting at first because people tend to look at the color of the gear and immediately think, well, he's still running yellow gear. There's a very specific reason for this. The best in slot bracers are currently the Storvagon ones from the holiday event, which you can't get right now because the holiday event is already done. So these are pretty much the next best. A lot of people are using these bracers across all different classes, mainly because if you look at them, we're talking about a decent amount of vitality. It's a huge amount of mastery. So 57k mastery and also 26k crit plus an essence slot. You're going to notice I'm using the essence of the Resolute here. So any of your melee skills, when this essence is slotted, have that 5% chance to reset the cooldown on Fight On. Fight On has changed with Gundabad. It's a much better skill now in that it doesn't give you crit rating and the heal. It actually gives you a flat 10% crit chance for the duration of that. So normally Fight On is a 3-minute cooldown. So you have an opportunity to just completely reset that at any point during that 3-minute window and being able to just reapply Fight On for, again, that big crit chance. And when you're mixing that crit chance from Fight On with the wild attack buff and with all your other damage bonuses, you're really starting to push out some really high numbers. So that is a good one. And if you're not familiar with the essence of the Resolute, that is a very old essence at this point. That is from back in Gondor days, from Pelargir. And you have to have the rep with the different factions out there, and you need some of the rep items from like Doran, Urnil, and places like that to be able to barter for the essence of the Resolute. So highly recommend you get that one. Also, we are looking at basically we've got the same ones, the Mountain Hold bracelets. This is a reputation based one from Gundabad. It's pretty easy to get. So we just have both of those. So again, the 6600 vit, the 57k mastery, and the 26k crit, plus a Delver's essence of critical rating. And then we have our steel ring of Thirstrock. That is going to be crit rating. That's what we're really looking at there, is 34, almost 35k crit plus the 8k vitality. It's a great one. And then the other one with it is the Mithril ring of Thirstrock, which is the inverse of it with the physical mastery. Now, I tend to do that. I will tend to offset my earrings, normally my bracelets, but these two I'm using very specifically, and the rings will offset. So I'll have one crit rating, one mastery one, and that's to kind of balance the build out. Some people will do both of them. Some of them will go with the lower mastery with the essence. Honestly, I've just found this to be a decent balance for right now until I get the 3-slot jewelry from tier 2 in the raid. Also, we have our pocket from the Houses of Rest as well. Now, keep in mind, if you do tier 3 Houses of Rest, it unlocks the barter for some of these better pieces like this one and the necklace and some of the other pieces. If you're still running like crafted gear or landscape gear, try to get into a tier 3 House of Rest so you can get that unlock. Now, the interesting piece here is that I do have a loot box helm. It's actually a really good helm for, you know, not a lot really. You've got a really good chunk of might on there, a decent amount of vitality, 45,000 physical mastery, 20k crit, and the slot on here. Now this one I would probably normally switch out for another crit, but I am at just a 0.1 difference on crit rating, so I started going mastery here. We have the shoulders from the first boss in Puklak. This is the tier 5 shoulders. So this is best in slot for me. This is going to be that 28k crit rating with the slot, good amount of vitality, really good amount of might, and then we've put a physical mastery in there. Now some of these you will see are flickering Delver's essences. I haven't upgraded all of them to just the Delver's essence, which is in this case would be I think 2,000 or 3,000 more mastery. So it is that kind of min-maxing. On the cloak here, this is one that I kind of go back and forth with about bartering for the tier 3 one from House of Rest, because I just cannot get the gold, or the blue cloak to drop. It just will not do it. But right now I'm using the 458. This is I believe from one of the quests, but decent amount of mastery on it with a slot. Throwing in our 25k mastery in there. This one needs to be upgraded. This is a piece I do really need to upgrade. Now the chest is also from House of Rest. We've got the 43k crit one plus a essence slot, so we're throwing some more crit in there. Again, I hope you're seeing the trend here of we want a lot of crit. Get those numbers pumping out there. We have the gloves from the bat boss in Thirstruck. So we've got our 2 slot gloves with 21k mastery, and then the 2 crit rating essences in there. We have our pants from Puklak's Den. This is also the tier 5 pants. Now I actually have the old, basically this is from 130, the trigger essences, if you guys remember those, because they still work. And I think it's still, anytime you have the ability to add flat percentages, it is a good thing to do. You're not worried about a rating number. So in this case, if you're at 200% damage, which is the cap, again, percentages push over caps. So, if I'm at 200 and this thing procs, I'm at 5% damage. And then we can get, 3 of the fellowship ones going at another 7.5% damage. All these little things stack up with, Anthem of War, and then the debuffs you're putting on. All of these things are just contributing to putting out massive amounts of damage. So if you, these are crafted, there is a lot of RNG involved with getting the trigger essences. So if you have them still, get yourself an essence reclamation scroll, pop those out, put them in one of your current pieces of gear so you get the current stat values, and get after it. Lastly, we got our boots here. I still have crafted boots because the tier 5 boots that dropped last night, unfortunately, were the tank versions. Probably could use them anyway for the tack mitt, but we still have these crafted boots. And actually, lastly, the bow. This is actually from tier 1 raid, the powerful bow of the Hidden Horde. Actually a really nice bow. It has a okay amount of might, a really nice chunk of vitality, and 37k crit. So this is actually a little bit nicer in my opinion than the loot box bow that you can get, because those numbers are just a little bit higher. All right, so that covers the gear that we're using. And again, just a reminder, crit, mastery, then tack mitt. Now the next part of this video is probably going to be a little bit longer because it's dealing with the new legendary system. Now, opinions aside on the legendary system, we've got some things that we need to cover. And again, I am using a yellow build, so you are going to see some yellow line traceries in here mixed with some other things. Okay, so to do this, you need to actually open your character panel and grab one of your legendaries and throw it into the socketing system here. so that we can take a look at this. All right. The new legendaries, when they're reforged at level 140, actually it's 131, but at the 140 cap, they will cap out at level 470 or item level 475 right now. So you can see right here, item level is 475, and actually all of my tracery slots are at 475. The difference being here, previously we had to use the scrolls of empowerment and crystals of remembrance and starlit crystals and all that stuff to enhance our legendaries. That is no longer the case. It is all done with the traceries themselves and the enhancement runes. Now, the thing about this too is when you use a tracery that has a certain item level, for example, if you get one that drops that is item level 450, when you apply that to a socket in your legendary, it makes the slot 450. So if it was 400 and you go to 450, you are skipping 50 enhancement runes that you would have needed to apply to that slot. So in this case, all of my slots are at 475. Another reason why that is important is if I go to change a tracery out, say I wanted to switch this Heraldry of the Ox to a different one. If I go get that new one and drop it in here, the slot will dictate what the value is on that tracery at that point. So they kind of work together. So we're going to go through some of these. And so we're starting off with Heraldry of the Ox. Again, you can see might, vitality, and a good chunk of physical mastery. This is the gold version. Now keep in mind the different rarities. So yellow, purple, blue, gold, they have different base values and on certain aspects of the tracery, and it's dependent on which one you're talking about. It's more relevant on your class or mastery traceries than it is some of the other ones. But ultimately, if you are min-maxing, you want to go for your gold ones, and that is something that people are trying to farm out and that drop on certain tiers of higher end content. So in this case, we have the Heraldry of the Ox, might, vitality, physical mastery. We have our AOE attack criticals. Common theme here is with our critical stuff. So 5.5% AOE attack crit chance, 33% AOE attack crit magnitude, and then the flat crit rating on it. Again, this is the gold version of that as well. We have our AOE attack damage. So just a flat percentage on the AOE attack damage, and then some physical and tactical mastery rating. Not really sure. Well, it does have the tactical because other classes can use this. This is not a word of mastery. Now we do get into our words of mastery here. So we're taking brutal strikes damage, and that's going to give us the 50%. Now notice this is a blue version too. So the base value on the that 50% is probably going to be 55% on the gold version, but the mastery is going to be the same at 475 regardless. So we have our wild attack damage plus 50% wild attack damage and some might. We have our ferocious strikes, reducing the cooldown, increasing the damage, and also giving us some nice crit rating there. Fury of Blades damage, 35% Fury of Blades damage plus some might. We have Raging Blades, which is going to be 35% Raging Blades damage and some more mastery. Again, so this is where Fight On gets interesting. So when you add the Fight On critical chance buff, this modifies the skill of Fight On to give you the plus 10% melee crit chance. So in conjunction with the Essence of the Resolute, that's what makes that so powerful. So you want to use those two together. And then for our final two down here, our Words of Craft, we have just flat out critical. Now, if you use Ascendant Lightning, you'll notice it says 4 out of 4. Those actually happen to be a set bonus. It does give me plus 15% lightning type damage, which I don't have, even though I do have the cool lightning based aura on my weapons. That actually doesn't do anything. And it does give us an extra 39,000 critical rating when we have all 4 across the 2 equipped legendary items. So then let's also take a look at our rune. I'll go back up. We are using a second Heraldry of the Ox, also gold version, and notice all my slots here are 475. So here is our AOE target count. So we're getting another 3 AOE target counts off of this, plus the ones from our trait lines. So now if we look at Raging Blade, we can actually hit 16 targets. Blade Wall, you're hitting 13 targets. Rend, you're hitting 13 targets. So all these things that you're being able to hit more targets, so you're making your AOE even more potent, which is great. So if you have a one of those, psychotic tanks that loves to pull an entire room, well, now you can hit more of it too, which is fun. That's the best part about being a champ, let's be honest. So we have our base morale multiplier. Really just, you've got a multiplier for your morale by 1, and then which is 5%. And then some additional vitality. We're adding in our damage over time. Pretty straightforward. Plus 20% damage over time with some additional physical mastery rating. We're getting down into our additional words of mastery. So battle frenzy cooldown, another reduction in battle frenzy, which brings that down to 10 seconds. The duration of the buff is 10 seconds. So pretty much you want to be always using, like, battle frenzy should always be on cooldown, because you're always getting the buff then. Exchange of blows melee damage. There was a debate about this a long time ago about the 35% exchange of blows melee damage. This does apply to your overall damage. So if you are at 200% damage, when you apply this buff, you will be at 235% damage. With some additional vitality. We have the Fear Nothing cooldown. This is one that different people will use in different situations. I use it because I like to try to take care of myself as far as poison spheres, stuff like that, as much as I can, and reducing that cooldown. It's not as much as it was before, so we're talking about it's a cooldown of 10 seconds, and then the buff that you get is 12 seconds. So you basically get a free pot every 10 seconds with this. The increased healing is nice, but it's a small amount. But when you do use Fear Nothing, you get the 10% buff. So great cleave duration. So we're using this in conjunction with Great Cleave. It's going to give us 10 seconds. This used to be a swap item. You would have an additional rune in your bag to swap to get the increase and then switch it back. But using this in conjunction with Battle Acuity for Great Cleave makes it a very powerful skill, because then you're getting a 40-second buff of plus 25% AOE damage. So if you know you're going into a big pull, you're going to pop that and you're going to do a lot of damage. The Horn of Gondor debuff. This is really nice because you are the plus 55% horn damage isn't really a big deal. What you're really looking at is the 2.2% Horn of Gondor mitigation debuff. So if we look at it, it's given the 3-second stun, but then also reducing their mitigation by 2.2%. That was a nerf. It used to be a rating that was actually a pretty decent number, but again, percentages tend to be better in this game, so it is what it is. And it's a 12-second debuff on a 20-second cooldown. And then lastly, we just have the other two for our lightning. So we get our 4-set crit bonus. Now, one thing, kind of a side note to the legendary system here, I made the mistake of putting things in the rune and the weapon that didn't really make sense for swapping stuff out. So now when I do swap out to other legendaries, I actually have to pull both the weapon and the rune out of my character panel before I can put the other two in, because you cannot have the same traceries, like class-based or words of power traceries, you can't have those same things on 2 weapons or 2 runes equipped. So I kind of messed that up. So if you do that, kind of map it out so that you can swap things a little easier and not have to pull both things out. Make it so you can actually like click on it on your bar and stuff like that. But that is kind of where you want to be. You want to be at, make sure you're reforged to item level 475. Get your enhancement runes, so all of your slots are 475, and then you want to start working up from your, you know, your purples to your blues to your gold traceries to really maximize everything that you're getting out of your legendary items. So when you combine all that together, when you mix your legendaries with your traits, with your passes, with all that stuff, you're really putting yourself in a great spot. And I think the champ is in a really good spot right now. It feels pretty good in most of the content that I'm doing. So I'm really happy with where he's at right now. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover as far as actual items that affect your character in game would be consumables. Now, these are things that you're going to want to have with you when you're doing any type of higher tier content. It's a good idea to have just in general and have them ticking. It just makes content easier. And in some cases it is quite necessary when you're doing things like raids or, you know, tier 3, 4, and 5 content. So here's some of the things that I use on the champion. I will actually run the plus morale and power. It's 5% for 6 hours. Great buff, just in general. It's a good one to have. Pretty inexpensive. Most of the store-bought buffs are actually pretty inexpensive off the store. You can get a nice stack of them for like 195 points on some of these. Tome of Defense, just a flat minus 10% incoming tactical, ranged, and melee damage for 6 hours. Also a great buff and almost a must-have if you're doing higher end content, because that's just adding to your overall damage reduction from your mitigations and stuff like that. Just make it easier on your tanks, make it easier on your healers, and don't die. The attack damage bonus, plus 5%. Again, another 6 hour bonus. It's a good one just to have in general, just kicking. And, you know, if we're trying to min-max that plus 5%, it does push you up over the cap. So it's always a good one to have as well. This one is especially for any class that is a little bit lower on the mitigation side. So this is something, again, that I use during a raid because my mitigations tend to be a little bit lower because of the way I'm spec'd and built out. So again, we have our tomes of tactical mitigation. These are 6 hour buffs as well. So you're getting another 55k tactical mitigation. Not the highest number in the world, but every little bit helps, and it is such a long buff that it is quite good. Now, as far as your more traditional stuff, your scrolls, we do have the Gundabad battle lore, 28k physical mastery. We have our Gundabad warding lore, which is a good amount, is 43,000, 41,000 on the mitigations. Now these are since these are crafted, they're not store-bought, they do last a lot shorter duration. These are only going to be 1 hour buffs. Your Gundabad tokens. Now, the tokens aren't as huge of a deal because the last several levels on crafting, you're really getting the same thing. So don't worry if you don't have Gundabad versions. The reality is you just want the +6 hope, and that's been the last several versions of tokens. The next one is going to be our regen food. And the regen food's kind of interesting this go around. Because it's actually made fishing relevant to get the absolute best food for regen. Now, if you don't have someone who's fishing, or, you know, the cost of it is really high on your server, you know, the comparison to freshwater fish plates and your 9-star pies, this is still a very good alternative. So keep that in mind. If you don't have the materials or the money to make the fish food, then do the 9-star pies, because they're still pretty good as well and a lot easier to make. As far as our stat and resistance food, we're using the fried beetroot sticks. It's giving you a decent amount of resistance. It's giving you the 2% as well, and then a nice little chunk of might as well for the 20 minutes. Now, as a champion, you're going to be wanting to have your potions of fervor. Also, these the last several versions are the same, so you can go, Gundabad, Minas Ithil. You can actually go a few levels back on it and still get the plus 45% devastate magnitude, and it's the same duration, same cooldown, all that good stuff. So don't worry about it if it's not the Gundabad version. And the last thing that I carry around is the actual crafted horns. They're not as good as they used to be because you used to get a buff that made them longer. But as max targets is 6, so if you need an extra stun in there, it's a good thing to have just to throw out there. And so those are all the consumables I use. If I have some of the other things like the random things out of Hobbit presents, I'll use them, like potions or bubbles or stuff like that. But those aren't things that I rely on and that I count on being there for when I'm doing big fights and stuff like that. All right, so the very last part about this is going to be something that is purely based on preference and how you play. I, for one, didn't use a lot of these until maybe the last year or two. I was always running pretty much a pure UI. Now, I'm talking about plugins. Plugins can sometimes cause issues with the game and how it responds, depending on which ones you have, how many you have loaded, if they're up to date or out of date. So those are all things you have to keep in mind. So some of the ones that I personally use would be Align. Align is actually a really simple one. I really like to have my UI in order, and very straight. So it actually gives you this grid layout that you can kind of make sure things are centered, and it's kind of an OCD thing, but it is a pretty nice one if that's something that that you like. And it's easy to turn on and off. You just type in /align in the chat box and that will turn it on and off. Side note on that, I use that and then get my UI the way I want it. And then I do the /UI space, save, and then name it. And then I have that UI that I can use on any of my characters then. I do have combat analysis on here. I don't use it a ton. Honestly, I don't get quite as much into the parsing that I used to. I found sometimes it just took away from the enjoyment of the game if I was just really hammering down on getting a specific number. As far as I'm concerned, a win is a win. If there's something I can do better or a piece of gear, I'm all about that, but I'm not going to be chasing parses. I will check it periodically though, just to see how consistent things are with crit chance and certain skills, see what their mins and maxes are and see how they line up against the tooltips and whatnot. Another little handy one is actually gear up. So this is this little icon right down here, this little blue icon. So if I were to swap my gear and say I was going to go out into the Ettenmoors and do some PvP, I could actually click through these and drag them down and it would swap my gear. I don't actually have them in my bag right now, so I can't actually swap them. But it gives you a warning if you're in the, if I'm in my my DPS build and I have all my PvP gear on, this will be red. So I'll get a visual indicator of saying, hey, you're wrong. So if I switch this to DPS, it'll say all items equipped and it's blue. So it's kind of a handy one, nothing too crazy. I'll save the big one for last, but skill timer is actually this one you're seeing right here with these 5 skill. If I use these skills, you'll see the cooldowns actually a little bit. This is actually really nice because it will catch the fight on reset. So it will get rid of this number and make it light back up as a secondary pop that I got a fight on reset. So it's very handy. And then so you can see all those cooldowns. And rather than seeing the shaded icon here, you can actually get a number and you can actually know, hey, I got, it's going to be 2 minutes till I got this back up, or I've got, 55 seconds left on controlled burn, whatever the case may be. Lastly, the big one is Prime. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen Prime. You've seen different iterations of people using different elements of it. So if you open it up, it is actually a very big, robust plugin. It has a lot of different things, and it is updated frequently as new content comes out. So you're going to get alerts and whatnot. Now, there is a thing with this. If you want the sound alerts, you do need to actually have the Prime sound effects player as well. So keep that in mind. It just has to be up and running, and then you have to do chat logging on wherever the notifications are. So if it's looking for a specific cue from a boss, like something that they say to trigger an alert, you have to have chat logging on so that the sound effects player can pick it up and play it for you. But there's a lot of stuff in here. You can do different auras. This one's great if you want to keep track of certain buffs, like this is actually your scrolls and hope. They go scrope. But if you have it when you are always loaded, give you an example here and we'll reload it. So I don't have these 3 buffs right now. So it's saying, hey, you don't have your scrolls and hope right now. So you need to pop those. So if I were to pop this, it actually goes away. It's another visual indicator to help you. If you play on a higher res screen where sometimes it's harder to tell when you've got all these buffs going on over here, you got a nice visual indicator on that. Not personally one I use, because I typically, anytime I start a fight, I'm just going to repop scrolls and tokens anyway. So I don't use that one as much. So I'm gonna flip that one back and reload and bring up our options again. There we go. So a couple other different things. You can do different things with a target window. If you're tracking a specific boss, they have individual buff bars. This is actually what I use. This lets me know when I actually have fight on and the buff from wild attack procced, so that I would be at an additional 15% crit chance when these are both on. There's a lot of other stuff in here, and if it's something you're interested in, definitely check out the notes over on the LOTRO interface and use the plugin compendium. But those are all the things that I typically use, and that is the current build that I'm using for all stuff in Gundabad. Like I said, there are some variations. There's, different pieces of gear based on certain scenarios. Different group comps might have you run a specific way. But this one, for me, with the groups that I play with, tends to do pretty well. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As a reminder, make sure you subscribe. If you found this helpful, let me know down in the comments. And I hope to see you guys in the next video or live stream soon. Thanks and take care.